Long-term memory is a mystery to cognitive psychologists because there seems to be no end to the duration or capacity of it. However, for no reason we can seemingly forget long-term memories. Think back to your first memory. That was a long time ago, isn't it? Think back to all the stories you have to tell and all the names you have to know and the items that you have stored in your places, like your kitchen or your garage. That's a lot of stuff, a lot of information in your long-term memory. For me, one of my oldest memories is when I was probably around the age of 4 or 5. See, my dad's a volunteer firefighter, and sometimes his pager would go off at night. If I was up, he would always come give me a hug before he left to go fight the fire. One night, I remember, he got a call and he left. I started crying and I told my mom that I didn't get a hug. So, my mom called my dad, he wasn't too far away, and he came back, he gave me a hug, and then he went back to fight the fire. Now, some psychologists would say that that memory stuck with me because it was quite emotional. However, I can't tell you what I had for dinner that night, or even what grade I was in. Leave a comment below of what your oldest long-term memory is. Now, I'm going to begin this video by talking about the two types of memory in our long-term memory: implicit memory and explicit memory. So first of all, implicit memory is the knowledge based on previous experiences that we perform almost automatically. And another characteristic is that they're difficult to share with others. See, implicit memories are usually hard to explain to other people, and sometimes even called non-declarative memories, because you can't directly declare it. One kind of implicit memory is something called procedural memory. Procedural memory, or procedural knowledge, is a type of implicit memory that is specifically the knowledge of the skills that we have learned. It is the knowledge of how to do something, of which we do not have to think very hard to accomplish. And at any given time, we are pulling all kinds of implicit memories from our procedural knowledge. This includes the conceptual knowledge of how to breathe, how to hold ourselves up, or just how to walk around the room. We may not be able to fully explain the facts about our breathing or walking, but we know how to do it even when we're not consciously thinking about it. The information in this system resides outside of our conscious awareness. In fact, all of the habits that you have are stored in your implicit memory. We don't really think about how to stand up. We just do it. A prime example of an implicit memory that you have strengthened thousands of times. Another great example of procedural knowledge is just riding a bike. Almost everyone knows how to ride a bike, but it's very difficult to explain, using words, how to ride a bike to someone else who has never done it before. Now, another form of implicit memory is called priming. Priming occurs when recall of one stimuli is improved by prior exposure to another stimuli. So, for example, when we're taught about thunder, we are most likely taught that it pairs with lightning. And if I tell you the word thunder, and then I ask you what's bright, you're more likely to say lightning than for, say, the sun, fire, or a camera's flash. Once one stimulus has been reintroduced, any stimuli that we associate with it floods back into our memories as well. We don't always consciously think slow down or speed up when we see a yellow light, but repeated lessons primed with yellow lights influence what our response is. Now, priming does more than just make word association games fun. It can also help us make sense of sensory input that we don't really know what to do with. Take the Yanny and Laurel phenomenon for a while back. The sensory input that we received while hearing the infamous recording was ambiguous, meaning it could have two different meanings. So our brains used priming, or the context of our environment, to pull up any possible related stimulus for assistance in deciphering what we heard. This is why if you mouth the word Yanny, you hear Yanny, and if you mouth the word Laurel, you hear Laurel. Now let's move on to the second type of long-term memory, explicit memory, also known as declarative memory. So declarative memory is the knowledge of facts and things. It's pretty simple. The knowledge is factual. It tells us that 1 + 1 = 2, that we own a red car, or that Mozart is an Austrian composer. One of the two main forms of explicit memory is something called episodic memory. Episodic memory is the knowledge of the order of things that happened in your life. Now here's an example that I'm going to use to show you the difference between types of explicit memories. If I were to ask you, what did you do yesterday? You would be able to answer with your explicit memories. You might say something like, I played Frisbee at Peace Valley Park with my friend Linda. The overall memory and the order of your trip to the park, the time that you went and the images of playing Frisbee, those all fall into your episodic memory. It plays out in your mind like an episode of your favorite Netflix series, in the order that it happened. This is why we call it episodic memory. Semantic memory, on the other hand, is the knowledge of what without context. Because taken out of context, including the time and place where these events occurred, you're left with many pieces of semantic memory. You know that Peace Valley Park is the name of a park in Bucks County. You know that your friend's name is Linda. And you know that the plastic disc that you hold in your hand is called a Frisbee. But, however, the knowledge of throwing and catching a Frisbee falls under procedural knowledge, which falls under implicit memory, And the knowledge that you met Linda before playing a frisbee is an episodic memory, which is a form of explicit memory. So in general, implicit memories are memories that we can't really write down, while explicit memories are facts we can write down. And there are all kinds of other different forms of memories like autobiographical memory, but that might be for another video. For now, let's get on to the 4 ways that we can use our long-term memory. So there are 4 main ways that you can pull information from your long-term memory. And psychologists say that the more you encode something, or the more that you study it, it'll move up this ladder, so to say, so that less and less effort is required to remember it. So the first rung is recall. So whenever you can pull answers out of the blue without a cue, you can recall it. If I said, who was the psychologist who performed the Stanford prison experiment, you would have to recall that Philip Zimbardo did. When something is on the tip of your tongue and you can't name it, you are unable to recall it. Secondly, we have recognition. Now this is very similar to what happens on a multiple choice test. You may not be able to just think up the word, but if someone gives you a list of 5 possible answers, you'll be able to quickly go, that's the answer. This is called recognition. Thirdly, we have something called recollection, and not very many people know about this, but this is the reconstruction of facts based on partial cues or reminders. For example, if I asked you what the capital of Missouri was, and then I gave you the cue 3rd U.S. President, you could probably recollect that the capital is Jefferson City. This is called recollection, and it happens when you have a cue or a reminder. And lastly, we have something called relearning. Now, relearning is very self-explanatory. We simply retrieve information when we learn it again. This retrieval and review makes that memory stronger the more that we relearn it. The more you relearn information for school, the more likely it's going to be to stick in your long-term memory and come up whenever you need to recall or recognize it. It's also important to note that relearning is different than learning something for the first time. So now that we've talked about recall, recognition, recollection, and relearning, let's get on to something called the interference theory. So, in short, interference happens when one memory prevents either the creation or the recall of another memory. So first off, I want to talk about proactive interference. This is when old information comes to the surface and interferes with your ability to process newer information. And one of the best examples of proactive interference is writing 2019 as the date when it's really 2020, which all of us will be doing probably up until around March. And a simple little trick to remember this is because pro means to go forward, just like in the word progress. Proactive interference blocks your ability to remember new things going forward. Secondly, we have something called retroactive interference. Retroactive interference is just the opposite. It occurs when current information interferes with your ability to go back and dig up old information from your long-term memory. So for example, let's say in high school you took a few Spanish classes and you were able to speak Spanish fluently. Then, in college, you started taking French classes. By the end of the year, you can speak French fluently, but you can't speak Spanish anymore. This is an example of retroactive interference, and you can remember this because retro means from the past, like a retro video game. Retroactive interference blocks your ability to access information from the past because of new information that you've learned. It's like overwriting data. As I end this video on long-term memory, I want to let you know that I recently finished developing a memory quiz that tests your long-term memory, also your short-term and working memory, in less than 5 minutes. And if you'd like to participate in that quiz and see how you compare against other people, there's actually a link in the description below so that you can take it for free. I spent a long time developing this test, and I believe it's the best one on the internet to take. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next video.